Good evening. Why don't we stand and go to the Lord in prayer? Father, we draw near to you right now, Lord. We thank you for this evening, Lord God, for bringing us here safely, Lord God, and for continuing, Lord, to pursue our hearts, Lord. And we thank you, Lord God, that you're the satisfier of our souls, Lord God. And it's in you, Lord God, we find everything that we need, Lord God. And we just thank you, Lord God, that you're always available to us, Lord, for what you've done, Lord Jesus, for what you've done, that we can just continue to draw to you, continue to just drink of your living water, Lord. We never thirst again, Lord God, with you, Lord. And we thank you, Lord, for that promise. And so, Lord God, we just cling to you, Lord. We want to worship you. We want to lift up our hearts unto you, Lord God, to prepare our hearts, Lord God, to hear your word, Lord, to hear your voice, Lord God. And thank you for this encouragement that we can get, Lord God, in the middle of the week, Lord, this time that we can spend together, Lord God, in your word, Lord. And so we lift up this time unto you, Lord God. We lift up all those, Lord, that are going through trials, Lord God, and because we just seem to keep going through trials, Lord God, but it's not in vain, Lord God. In your name, Lord God, it's not in vain. And it's only through you, Lord God, that we can continue, Lord God, to be seen through, Lord God. You are the one who sees us through, Lord God, and helps us through, Lord. And so we lift up this time unto you, Lord God, in worship. Pray in the name of Jesus. Amen. Let's sing that song called Satisfy My Soul. It starts with la-las, so you're welcome to join. La 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 In the valley of tears, to the mountain tops, your river flows into my heart. It awakens love, it makes me new, it stirs me for more of you, God, more of you, God. So I'm reaching out for a melody, the word of God alive in me. Open my life to grace and truth. I'm thirsty, Lord, for more of you, God, more of you, God. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul like nothing in this life. My joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. And la 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 la. So lead me to the secret place and show me how to seek your face. Far more than all I say and do, I'm thirsty, Lord, for more of you, God. More of you, God. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul like nothing in this life. My joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul. Like nothing in this life, my joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. Your love, oh Lord, your love, oh Lord, has ruined me. For everything but your glory. Your love, oh Lord, has ruined me. For everything but your glory. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul. And like nothing in this life, my joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul. Like nothing in this life, my joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. La 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 la. You satisfy my soul. La 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 la. I'm running for your love. Your river is a flood that satisfies my soul. You satisfy my soul like nothing in this life. My joy and my delight. You satisfy my soul. You satisfy my soul. Forever you are faithful, Father to the fatherless. You uphold the one who feels forsaken. You are faithful, God, and faithful. Forever you are faithful, lover of the wounded heart. You defend the poor and the forgotten. You are faithful, God. And I will sing to the maker of heaven and earth. God, you reign forever, and your love will endure. Faithful Faithful, forever you are faithful. Shelter for the fragile soul. You lift us up. You hold us all together. You are faithful, God. And I will sing to the Maker of heaven and earth. God, you reign forever, and your love will endure. Faithful and true is the name of the Lord. You are faithful, God. And I will sing, and I will sing to the Maker of heaven and earth. God, you reign forever, and your love will endure. Faithful and true is the name of the Lord. You are faithful, God. And you are there in every season of my soul. You are there. You're the anchor that will hold. And you are there in the valley of the shadows. You are faithful, God. You are there, and you are there in every season of my soul. And you are there, and you're the anchor that will hold. And you are there in the valley of the shadows. You are faithful, God. And I will sing to the Maker of heaven and earth. God, you reign forever, and your love will endure. Faithful and true is the name of the Lord. You are faithful, God. Let's sing that one more time. I will sing to the Maker of heaven and earth. God, you reign forever, and your love will endure. Faithful and true is the name of the Lord. You are faithful, God. Yes, you are. You are faithful, God. We know you are. You are faithful, God. Yes, Lord God, we continue to depend on your faithfulness, Lord God. You are faithful even when we are unfaithful, Lord. And we thank you, Lord God, that you're consistent, Lord. And you continue, Lord God, to meet us where we are, Lord God. Thank you that you continue to pursue our hearts, Lord God. Thank you that you're the author and finisher of our faith, Lord. We count on you continuously, Lord God, to see us through, Lord God, to take us through, to carry us through, Lord God. Thank you that we can surrender to you, Lord God. And that's our responsibility, Lord God, is to surrender to you, to be obedient to you, Lord God, and to be faithful as you are faithful, Lord. Forgive us our sins. Forgive us our shortcomings, Lord God. We pray, Lord. And help us, Lord God, to continue to hear your voice, Lord. Let your Spirit move us, Lord God. Let your grace continue to move us, Lord, toward yourself, Lord. Help us to continue to take advantage, Lord God, of your grace, Lord God, to do what's right before your eyes, Lord. We pray these things in Jesus' name. And we all say, amen. Let us greet each other.
Well, good evening and welcome to Calvary Chapel Three Crosses this Wednesday evening. Tonight, Pastor Dwayne, he'll be teaching in the book of Daniel chapter 5, and the title of his message is, Can You Read the Writing on the Wall? And so we can prepare our hearts for the message tonight coming from Revelation. On Sunday, Pastor Dwayne will continue in the book of Revelation, so you can prepare your hearts for that as well this coming Sunday. This would be a great time to check your cell phones and be a blessing if you could make sure they're not in the ringer mode, they're turned off, so that we don't have any distractions this evening. A couple of announcements that we have. We always like to encourage the corporate prayer. We're going to have that this evening right after the service, and we'll bring our prayers and praises to the Lord together here this evening after the service. And we also gather on Tuesday mornings at 6:30 a.m. for the same, and that would be a blessing if you could join us, and so keep that in mind. And also we want to point out that this Sunday and each last Sunday of the month is Girl Talk, and that's a time where young women can come together, they can talk, they can share things that they may not normally be able to talk about with folks, but they're going to do that this Sunday the 28th, and it'll be during the 11 a.m. service, and they'll be gathered back there for their lunch as well. So if you have any young women that could benefit, I encourage them to be here with the folks with Girl Talk. And we do have March 7th and 9th. We're going to Tucson for the Pastors Conference. I'm sure there's hotels in Tucson. It's not too late to sign up, although you would have missed the early bird special. And now the cost is $99 per person. But it would be well worth it if you would want to attend that. There's information in the foyer about that. Also, we also have information in the foyer about the Convoy of Hope. The Convoy of Hope is coming on April 30th, and it's a literal convoy of trucks that come in and they set up large camp. It's going to be at New Mexico State University, and they offer services to those in need. And they have everything from haircuts to family portraits to medical exams, dental exams, food, clothing, all the things that someone that is in a bad way would maybe need. So there's information in the foyer. There's a sign-up sheet. Many have signed up already. And March 1st at 12 noon at the Presbyterian Church, University Presbyterian, there's information about that in the foyer. They'll have a meeting for volunteers. So all the information regarding that's in the foyer, and so you can check that out. If we have any first-time visitors, we'd like you to receive an information packet from us. We'd be happy to give that to you. You can see any one of us. And we also have agape boxes in the foyer for you to give as the Lord leads. So, and also, just something we want to ask everyone to do is, if you know someone that could use the Lord in their lives, bring them to church. Invite them to come with you. Every week we have people we see that could use the Word of God to change their lives. So, if you have someone like that, don't be afraid to say, come on to church with us, and bring them with you. And the greatest outreach tool we have is our own invitations to folks to come and hear the good news of Jesus. So keep that in mind as well. So now for Pastor Dwayne.
Good evening. Did I say that right? You guys are so far away. You guys don't want to come up closer? I was thinking, how can I move this pulpit in the middle? I got a quick question for you. I was thinking, I was just sitting there. You guys understand why we do these announcements is to inform you guys. So I was thinking, sometimes that's scary, right? Scare myself. Does it seem effective to you guys? We're trying to figure out a way to make sure, we want you guys to be part of the church. We want you guys to know. And we're going to start asking for emails again if you want to be informed on different events. We used to have an app, and we're going to think about redoing that again, too. We're not sure how you get, how on your phones you can get push notifications? Somehow, so that you guys know what's going on. And I was talking to Pastor Fred and Rick, like in the men's Bible study. Sometimes when special events come up, you want to go to it. And then you hear on it about Sunday, and it's on Saturday, and you forget. You ever do that? You hear about it on Sunday, forget by Saturday? Well, I said, people are adults. They should be able to remember this. And then I did it myself. So I'm an adult, but you just get busy with things and you forget. So we're trying to think of ways to help you guys, to inform you. And one way I found out is you can do text grouping. So like for the men's Bible study, the women's Bible study, if you want to be part of that, every time they'll send you like the day before, and it'll just give you a little reminder. I need those reminders because as time goes by. So if you guys have ideas, or if you like those, if you think we can do the announcements a little better, just get with Tim or anyone. So you guys are part of the church. It's good to have information. You might be sitting there and thinking, is Tim done with announcements yet? Anybody ever do that? Did anyone do that tonight thinking, Tim, can you just... Marco did it. Marco doesn't count. Anyway, did you guys understand what I'm saying? You guys are all part of the church, so help us out so we can help each other out. Lester will be gone for a little while on Wednesdays. This is live, though, right? I had a joke that I wanted to crack, but I don't want to be considered a racist. But I was thinking, maybe I should let that one go, huh? Okay. It's funny to me. I have all these jokes, but anyway, work is taking him out of town. So just be praying for him. I have a weird sense of humor. You guys know that, but I think we'll just move on from there. If you could turn with me to Daniel chapter 5. Can you read the writing on the wall? We got a phrase, everyone hears that, the writing on the wall. The writing is on the wall, and it comes from this text. So let's open up. Apparently, we need to open up with prayer, right? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time. I pray, Lord, that your words would be spoken, that this would be a time as we dig into the Old Testament once again, the amazing book of Daniel. So many of the things that you did through Daniel, and even here at the end of his service, Lord, we see how you deal with people, how you interact. And it just shows us that you are alive and real, not just a story. We just pray for today's teaching. In Jesus' name, amen. I didn't realize as Lester's been going through this, as you study things on your own, and I encourage you to go back and read Daniel for yourself and go back and kind of like try to figure out what it's talking about in detail. The book of Daniel is amazing. The stories that are in this book, you see not only Daniel interacting with God. Today we'll see this king that wants nothing to do with God, but actually opposes God, interacts with God. And you'll find out he is they believe, the great-grandson of King Nebuchadnezzar. A couple generations down, and you guys remember from last week how God dealt with Nebuchadnezzar. How could you forget that story? Being his grandson, yet how many of us in our own life, we see our parents, we see our friends or family experience something, but yet we don't learn from their experience. It's like, okay, it seems to be history repeats itself, and we'll see that today. What's interesting between Daniel chapter 4 and Daniel chapter 5, 20 years have passed. When we begin this, we go from Nebuchadnezzar right into, it's like, well, what happened to all the years in between? Let me just give you a brief history of this. Nebuchadnezzar now moves off the scene. He's succeeded by a son in just a few years. The son which is assassinated by his own brother-in-law. Isn't it amazing how you see the power struggle once someone that's been a king or leader for a long time, when he's gone, just like King David, just like King Solomon, things seem to fall apart. Everyone begins to fight for power. Even Alexander the Great. Matter of fact, he set it up that way. He did not appoint a successor. And so he said, the strongest will win. But what he did, he caused the kingdom to divide. But here in this case, we see that the son reigned only for a few years, assassinated by a brother-in-law. This brother-in-law ruled for 4 years, but he himself was killed in battle. The next two rulers occupied the throne, but only for a brief time. And the second of these two rulers, his name was Nabonidus. And he's important because we'll see where today's king is his son. And this guy, I'm trying to say his name. The Old Testament has some really hard names, doesn't it? Nabonidus. He was actually the son-in-law to Nebuchadnezzar. And he was married to the widow of a previous king. So he has all these connections. So at this time we see his son is Belshazzar. And that's the king we're going to be talking about today. And what really happened was this king, I should say this name for the last time, Nabonidus, he was captured by the Medes and Persians. And because of that, his son began to rule while he was in captivity. So it's very interesting as we get into this. But let's go ahead and read Daniel. Let's turn to Daniel 5, read verses 1 through 4, and then we'll set the background for what's happening. Verse 1, King Belshazzar gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the kings and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines might drink of them. So they brought in the gold goblets that they had taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines, they drank from them. And as they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So we move forward from King Nebuchadnezzar. We move on to 20 years later to his grandson, King Belshazzar. As we look at this, what I got out of these first four verses was this king was full of pride and arrogance. And the reason why I say that, the background setting, do you know what was going on? For a king to have a banquet sounds normal, doesn't it? But do you know what historically what was going on at this time? The Medes and the Persians were attacking their very walls. But this king was confident in the city of Babylon with the security that he had behind these walls. So they're coming against, can you imagine that, attacking their very walls, and he says, let's have a banquet for over 1,000 of his noblemen. And he also, so basically what he's showing, they say, he's showing contempt for the Mede and Persians. He says, you know what, I don't fear you, I have contempt for you, I'm not even worried about you. As they themselves coming together. If you know anything about history, the Medo-Persians are going to be the next empire after the Babylonian Empire. Well, we also see that King Belshazzar has, it seems to be a defiance towards God, the God of Israel. He seems to have contempt for the Persians and for God. And why do I say that? Well, we see that during this banquet, he requests that they go get these cups. Let's just not say goblets anymore. It just really sounds weird. Go get these cups. Get these that were taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Now, why would he do that? I mean, he's drinking already, and he's saying, go get these, and they wanted to drink from it. Basically, they're going to make them defile these cups. They were not just to be drunk from. They were for a specific purpose to serve the true and living God, the God of Israel. And he knows this. So he has a purpose behind this. He's showing contempt for God. He's actually, in essence, opposing God. And at the same time as he's drinking from this cup of God, God's cups from his temple, he's actually giving honor and glory to the gods of Babylon. Now, many people say his mother or his grandmother was a priestess in the temple of these Babylonian gods, as if he's trying to bring Babylon back into the worship of these pagan gods. Because believe it or not, Nebuchadnezzar, after he was running around, you guys remember that last week when he was turned into whatever that was called, into this creature, that when he came back, believe me, he was serving the true and living God. He was pushing Babylon back towards that. And now we see as if his grandson is trying to undo everything by, in essence, thumbing his nose to God. I'm drinking out of your cup, and you're not real. You know what that reminds me of? Who was it? Was it Elijah that challenged the priest of Baal? Elijah. They sound so the same. In the same way, he's like, if we're going to dump water on all this wood, and if your God is real, he can still light this fire. Do you guys remember the story? He was making fun of them. But the difference here is those gods are made up by man. But this king, Belshazzar, is challenging God who is real. God who has made everything. In the same breath, in the same moment. Can you picture this big drunken party going on outside of the walls? These armies are coming against it. And he says, go get these cups and begin to glorify in gold and the God of gold. And these gods are so amazing. And the God of Israel is, look, he can't even protect these little cups. So I just see this whole arrogancy, this, just think about it. He inherited, because I went back and also read chapter 4, the end of it. It says when Nebuchadnezzar was restored, God made his kingdom even greater. So this grandson is inherited quite an empire. And really didn't have to do anything just to be born into the family. So let's go ahead and look at verses 5 through 6. Now, think about it. He's partying it up. He's mocking God. He's worshiping these gods. And suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall. Can you imagine that? You're out, let's just say you're out partying. And then you look at the wall and you just see a hand writing on. I mean, you're thinking, did I drink too much of this bad wine? Listen to what happens. He says, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. Here's his response. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. How does God respond to this arrogance and contempt that King Belshazzar showed him? Well, he writes on the wall with his very finger, and everyone in that room could see it. So how does the king respond to this? This is from one moment to the next. He's partying, having a good old time. He's the center of attention. He's the king, right? And all of a sudden, he says he watched as his finger began to write. You understand as we go on that he could not read what was being written. What happens here is he could perhaps have been even intoxicated by this time. But what we see is he immediately sobers up. He didn't need a cup of coffee to sober up. All of a sudden he goes from laughing and being intoxicated to sober and scared to death. He went from arrogant and boldness to filled with fear. Now, how do we know that he was filled with fear? Let's just look at the description. Have you ever been so scared that you've turned pale? How about so frightened that you feel weak in the legs? Take it one more step. You're so scared that your knees are knocking it. It sounds like a silly illustration, but it happens, right? You get so scared you're shaking, basically what he's saying. He's shaking so bad that his knees are hitting. That's scared, isn't it? He is. That is so amazing how he went from being such, I know everything and mocking God to this. Why was he so frightened? Why was he so frightened? I mean, it would freak me out too, but would it cause fear? Well, think about what he just did. He just mocked God of Israel. He just was getting these cups and showing contempt and this attitude to the God of Israel. What I see there is, how do they treat Christians today? Isn't it amazing how the world goes out of its way to show contempt for Christians? You got to show tolerance for Muslims. You got to show tolerance for witchcraft. You got to show tolerance. But Christians seem to be mocked more than anyone else because it's not a religion, because there's truth in it. So he realizes that. And perhaps even after seeing this, memories come back to his mind of his grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. He had to, if his grandfather didn't tell him, which I'm pretty sure he did, grandson, you know how your grandfather talks to you, and he's like, this is something you should never do. My grandfather told me many things not to do, and I didn't listen to him either. I want to tell you one thing that sticks with me. He says, never, ever. Well, a couple things I did listen to. This one was, don't join the army. My dad was, my grandfather was. He went in as, when you go in the military, you go in as an E1. When he got out after 2 years, he was an E1. He got in trouble so many times. And another thing he told me to do, he says, never volunteer for anything. And I stuck with that. But here we see, he's probably reflecting, and my grandfather told me of how God dealt with my arrogance. Now think about Nebuchadnezzar. When he came back after that period of being running like a wild animal, he came back, and as he repented to God, that's when God restored him. You don't think he was telling everyone around him, especially his kids? Kids, you don't want to show arrogance towards God. This is what he did to me, and believe me, it was not fun. I was out of my mind. So can you see that? I could see all that coming from that. You ever have a smell or something you see just brings back these memories? I could see this happening to him. And I truly believe, just as we know as people, when we do things that are wrong towards God. When you sin, do you really need someone to say, that's wrong? I think you already know that, right? So I'm pretty sure he knows. And the other thing is, when he's looking at these words being written, as he's freaking out, all he sees is his hand writing on the wall. He cannot read it. But in his heart, he knows, this message is for me. But I have no idea. And I don't think he believed for a minute that I need someone to tell me what this means, because I know it's encouraging words. I messed up, man. I got to find out what's going to happen next. So let's see what happens next, verses 7 through 9. I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed this Daniel. There's even more to this. Verse 7. So the king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and the diviners. Then he said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. So the king responds in the only way that he knows how to. How do people in the world respond? They don't know to seek God. They seek after the wisdom of the world, the understanding of the world. So he goes, okay, let me find the wisest men that I have. That's what I pay him for, right? Bring them in so they can tell me what these words say. And check it out. He encourages them. Think about it. If someone offered this package to you, this is the full package. We love it when, like, you go to an interview for a job and they say, we're going to give you the full package. He said, I'm going to give you everything. I'm going to give you authority. I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you position. You're going to be the third highest. You guys understand why he offered the third highest? Many people saying his father, which is still imprisoned. There's many stories about it. Either in prison or he's not there, but he still has authority, so he's number one. And then Belshazzar is number two. So they offered right underneath the king. You'll be as much authority right below me. So authority, riches, position. But they still could not tell them what these words meant. Imagine, would you be trying really hard? You know what? Let's just make something up. I would like to have the money. All this was offered to them. The king sounds, just think about what the king's offering. Does this not sound like a desperate man? Does this not sound like someone that's scared to death? Because he was scared to death. The scripture tells us he was scared. The big problem that the wise men had, they had no understanding of the things of God. And you know why they had no understanding of the things of God? Because they had no relationship with the true and living God. That's why people today that are educated, they're smart by worldly standards, they're wise. They can't understand the Word of God because they have no relationship with Him. And God designed it that way. So these wise men are looking at words that are clearly written by the hand of God. But they can't read what God says. They can't even ask God, what did you say? Because they don't even know Him. Even though they were offered such a large reward, they lacked godly wisdom and they lacked knowledge. And here's the key point. This wisdom and knowledge was given, for example, to Daniel by God. This ability to interpret things, Daniel wasn't like this, he was a really smart guy, but the reason why, because God had gifted him with intelligence, gifted him with understanding. And when these dreams would come, and even in today's interpretation, he was able to read this because God gave him that knowledge, that ability. We'll see that here in a little bit. The wisdom of the world fails King Belshazzar. Have you ever had and sought after the wisdom of the world and it fail you? You ever sought someone's wisdom and it just doesn't stand up to par? It didn't work out the way it should have? In the same way, think about it. King Belshazzar's already freaked out. He's already scared. He's already pale. He turns another shade of whiter. I mean, he's going from pale to, what is it? We don't care about correcting. He's paler. He's just white as a sheet. And now his fear. What the Bible tells us, because he trusted in the world and they had no answers. He's looking at the wise. Can you imagine that? Looking at the most wise people in his kingdom. And they're like, I don't know. I don't have a clue. So it went from being fearful, his fear, it says, increased within him. This is what the world does for you. It has no answers. It's funny, we're going through this election cycle, and it's great analogies for sermons, because you look at them, they promise you the world. We know, as if they say, this will fix everything, just pick me. And they get in there and it's like, what happened? You didn't fix anything. Because I was just telling you stuff. In the same way, these guys are always telling the king stuff. But they didn't have the answer at this time. So let's go ahead and look at verses 10 through 12 and see what happens next. So we're at a point where King Belshazzar is a point of he is without hope. He's full of fear, and he's already turned to the world, wisdom, no answers. He's just sitting there. You ever been to a point where you don't know where to go? You're out of resources. This is where we find him. Then here's what happens. The queen, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. This is a man in your kingdom. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, we notice he refers to him as his father, but it's not his father. But just like people say, our father Abraham, they refer to them to be like ancestors of. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, almost the same name, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. She says without a doubt, he will tell you. Now, what I see is the queen apparently overhears the scene I just described. She hears the king talking with other leaders, and what else does she hear in his voice? She hears fear. You ever hear someone talk when they're full of fear? I mean, you can hear it in their voice. So she hears it. She approaches the king, and she speaks to him. Now, when I read this, it caused me to pause, and it caused me to go back and research this queen. Because in the Babylonian kingdom, in the Persian, the Medo kingdoms, you don't just, even as the queen, you cannot just approach the king. And we see an example of this with Queen Esther. You remember in Esther chapters 3 through 5? She needed to go to the king because this, I think it was, I can't remember his name. There's a guy in there that wanted to put all Jews to death because Mordecai, Hamas, or something, I think that's what you said. Haman, there you go, Haman. He got mad at Mordecai because Mordecai wouldn't show him the respect that he wanted. Check this out. This is amazing. He was so mad at Mordecai. He found out Mordecai was a Jew. He says, I'm going to kill not only you, I'm going to kill every Jew. It turns out Queen Esther is a Jew. So Mordecai is saying, you need to go to the king. And if you go back and read in chapters 3 and 4, she says, I can't just approach him. He'll put me to death. And what's interesting, at this time, the king had not spoken to her for 30 days. So what the historians and commentators believe is that she kind of fell out of grace with the king because he didn't call on her. In other words, didn't want to see her. So she comes to the point, I need to do this. This is why God has placed me here. So she goes before and presents herself. He sees her and tells her to come, and she actually prevents the Jews from being destroyed. So I'm thinking, this queen of Babylon, she goes in there, two things. She approaches the king, but also she knows of Daniel, who the king himself doesn't know. So who is this lady? Who is this queen? Apparently, she is not the king's wife. What it turns out to be is that she is considered like the queen mother, his mother. Because if you go back to verse 2, he says, when he was partying down at the banquet, it says his wives and concubines were there. His actual wives were there. This queen was his mother. So, and if you think about it like that, you go back and see she can hear the fear in the king, her son's voice. And she acts like a mother. She goes before him. She shows the due respect, but she approaches him and tells him about Daniel. Because she's older, she experienced Daniel. Daniel's still around, just so you know. He's not dead and gone. He's still there. So she knows him, and she experienced what her father had seen and happened to him. So she said she had contact with Daniel. She even describes Daniel. She says, he's a man who has the spirit of the holy gods. Now, she missed that part, holy gods. She knew of his insight. She knew of his intelligence. She knew of his wisdom, his understanding, his ability to interpret dreams. Because she said, get this man and he will tell you what the writing says. It sounds like there's no doubt in her mind that Daniel can, because she knows, even though she's misdescribing it to the gods, she knows that God worked in him. She could see that something's different about him. So what does the king do? First of all, it's his mother. Your mother gives you advice. He's older. You know, when you get older, you realize you listen to your mother more. The things she tells you is good advice. So, first of all, he is filled with fear. He has nowhere else to go, so why not listen to her? So he listens to her, and he calls Daniel. We find that in verse 13 through 16. It says, so Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, are you Daniel, the one of the exiles my father the king brought from Judah? Now listen how he begins to speak to him. He says, I have heard. He's going to continue to say that phrase, I have heard, because where did he hear it from? From his mother. I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. It sounds like this king could use some wisdom himself, because he has no clue about Daniel. He goes on to say, the wise men and the enchanters were brought before me to read these writings and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations. Again, he said, I've heard that you can give interpretations and solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. When everything is going great, when this party is going nonstop, do you hear mention of God or God's servants? God's servants are either mocked, neglected, or hidden away. When things are going good, the king didn't need them. Think about how much King Nebuchadnezzar relied upon Daniel, his wisdom. And he was greatly blessed because of Daniel and the other three Jews that were raised up with great wisdom. But when the hand of heaven came out, wrote this sobering message, panic-stricken, worldly men cry out and seek after God, don't they? Even the world, when things go bad, it's just amazing how they begin to call out to God, even though before that they said he didn't exist. So they forgot all about Daniel. And of course, by this time, Daniel's up in age. So, he's probably, he was taken well care of, but he's not being used at all. Isn't that kind of interesting to have people come in different leaderships? You get a new leader, and they totally disregard people that are there. And what's interesting is, like, sometimes when a company takes over another one, they'll come in and they'll get rid of the older guys. Man, the older guys are the ones that know how to do it. The ladies that have been there, let's not say older ladies that have been there for a while too, have the knowledge and the experience that they need to share with the younger ones. That's why it's important as older Christians, not necessarily in age, but more mature Christians, share and disciple younger Christians. Because you've experienced many things that you need to share with them. So they cry out and they bring Daniel in. The king tells Daniel, I heard that you have the spirit of these gods with you. Again, it shows that he himself has no knowledge of Daniel. I think this king, as you see his attitude of partying during all this time, he's just a spoiled, arrogant, brat, rich kid, if you want to put it like that. He's been given everything. The king continues, I hear that you can interpret things. And then what does he do? He offers Daniel the same proposition, the full package that he offered his enchanters. Basically, he just wants an answer. He wants to know what's written. Okay, I'll give you all this stuff. Isn't that what the world does? They throw this stuff at you. Just do it my way or help me out. I'll give you all this stuff. Sounds enticing, doesn't it? Can you imagine if you went into somewhere just like this? I'll give you the riches. I'll give you power. I'll give you position. Wouldn't you want to give this guy an answer? Wouldn't that kind of entice you? How does Daniel respond? I want you guys to listen to how Daniel responds, because you can see a guy that's seasoned in his relationship with God. He knows God. He's experienced God in amazing, miraculous ways. He's went through hardships. But let's listen. In verses 17 through 21. Then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Maybe that would be where you and I jumped up and say, hey, I'll take it. He can answer it. I would take it. But he says, he goes on to say, nevertheless, I don't want your gifts, I don't want your things, but I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. He already knew what it said. Your majesty, the most high God, gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of this high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Nebuchadnezzar was a powerful king. Do you hear this description that God has actually given of him? Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. Man, this dude was in the position of all power there. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven, until he acknowledged the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. Now you get from that part, God is the one that places whoever's in leadership, he puts them there. We may not like it, but it doesn't matter. God has more wisdom than us. Again, Daniel's an old man at this time. He's a man that has experienced many things. Let's look at what some of the things that Daniel has experienced. Remember, he was taken into captivity into Babylon, out of Israel, as a young man. Later on, we see him being promoted into a high position in Babylon. And in this high position, what happens next? He was cast into the lion's den. Sounds like Joseph, doesn't it? Up and down. Then forgotten by the new kings. The new kings just forgot about him. Nebuchadnezzar relied on him, and Nebuchadnezzar knew. Not just Daniel. This is what we need to be known as Christians. People need to know the God we serve is great and he's amazing. But Daniel lived in a way that people could see that. Do we live in a way that people could say, man, I want to know that God? Because compared to everything else, there's no comparison. I mean, we know our God created everything. We know God can heal anyone. We know God has all the answers and the truth, but yet we as believers at times walk around defeated. Yeah, I serve the God that made everything. My life is terrible. He can help you, though. I mean, we're not very good salesmen, are we? Do you really believe who God is? That God created us in his image? That he created us to serve him? You know, God doesn't need us. But from the joy of his heart, he is allowing us to be a part in his great, amazing plan. Here's what we've been talking about lately in the church. He's called us to be heralders, messengers. The simple message. You know, you need to go to college and go to theological school, study the Bible for 10 years, and then take the message out. No, what he said is, you have the message of how I changed you, how I delivered you from sin. Go tell the world the good news that Jesus Christ can do this for you. So why aren't we out there telling people? Because we're too busy. Because is it not important? Because we allow Satan to cause us to be too busy. I mean, I can sit and watch television for 3.5, even 6 hours, and I could not tell you a clue what I watched. I wasted half a day. We can take time and do stuff like that, but are we able to take from our own time and do things for God? Like simply, as you're walking in the store, take the time. God puts these divine appointments with us all the time, doesn't he? You guys experience those. People come up and begin to talk to you, and you're not even talking about Christ. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you guys a video in I think maybe this week. It's how not to invite someone to church. You guys ever hear the skit guys? Where they do this thing, and it's like, he's a Christian, and his neighbor knows it, but the neighbor's wondering why isn't he inviting me to church? And he's like scared to tell him about it. Well, why is that? So as we get back to Daniel, as I get off track a little bit, we see Daniel being this great example. Man, the Old Testament is filled with great examples. You got King David, you got Joseph, you got the mighty men of David. There are so many in there. So Daniel goes through all these things, good and bad things. But yet, what do we see in him? He remains faithful. He remains a faithful man of God. And when we say man, it can be man or woman of God. But we're talking about Daniel. He remains faithful as a man of God. Can you say that about yourself? Going through difficult times, are you remaining faithful to him? Or are you just faithful when things are good? You know, Lord, I'm with you, but when things go bad, I'm like, where did you go, God? He knew that the king's gift, think about it, he rejected these riches. Again, he's older, he's experienced all these things, but he knew these gifts meant nothing. Nothing in comparison to the blessing that God had already given him and the promises that he is going to experience and we're going to experience in the future. So he responds to this offer by saying, keep your gold, keep your power, keep your position. Basically, what is he saying? I don't need them. Now, you think this king was used to hearing that? This seems a little different. You know how Daniel was afraid to tell, a little fearful about telling Nebuchadnezzar the dream because the dream interpretation wasn't good. But to this grandson, he didn't seem to have a problem. This grandson was so arrogant and so needed this correction. He's basically saying, I don't need your stuff because guess what? I'm content on where God has me. Are you content where God has you? You know, I'm talking to my brother and stuff. It's like, always like, if I just get this better paying job, if I get more, you guys ever think, getting paid more is good, but you're always saying, if I can just get this or that, I'm going to be happy. How about being content where God has you? Because God, wherever you're at work, at home, at school, God has you there, and He can use you there to speak to someone. It's not all about just making a wage or learning in school when you go to college. It's not the funnest thing. We could get focused on life and always complaining. Lord, I'll serve you when I get done with this phase, or when I get that raise or that promotion. I'll have more time then. Or how about this? When I retire, I'm going to be open and free. And then you're like, I want to travel, God. See, it never ends, does it? It's basically, you know what? I'm content, and I want to be used by you for where I'm at. What you notice here, what we just read, Daniel doesn't say, okay, he says, I'm going to give you the interpretation, but he doesn't give it right away. He doesn't tell him what the writing on the wall. Don't you guys want to know what the writing on the wall means? What's the writing? Come on, Daniel, just get to the point. Instead, he begins with a history lesson. I mean, how do you guys like history lessons? I used to hate them. I would memorize history and take the test and forget, but now I'm intrigued because, especially biblically, I want to know what God did, so I know God's character, and I know how he acts. But right now, I'm sure this king is like, all right, dude, a history lesson? Are you kidding me? And I'm in the midst of falling apart here, and you want to give me a history lesson? Well, why is he doing that? He is telling him these are the things that you should already be aware of. He's also giving him reasons why this miraculous writing is happening. It was God, the Most High, who made, what he's saying, it is the God of Israel that made the Babylonian kingdom so great and powerful. Your grandfather knew this because, again, he's reminding him of stuff that you should already know. This is what happened to your grandfather. He became proud, and look what happened to him. He became proud and arrogant, proclaiming. Nebuchadnezzar was saying, what happened to him? You remember? He stood up and said, all this stuff is because of me. This kingdom is so great because I did it. And God said, no, you didn't, and here's the judgment. You lose your mind, and he went, as we just read, crazy for a amount of time. God had warned Nebuchadnezzar, but he also, like his grandson, did not heed the warning. A year before, Nebuchadnezzar had been warned a year before this happened. How easily we forget. God judged Nebuchadnezzar. He dealt severe. Wouldn't you say that was a severe judgment? Has God ever turned you into an animal and made you sit out and run in the wild? Can you imagine that? That's pretty severe. I mean, God's going to take my stuff. You're going to lose my job. I'm going to lose that. But he hasn't sent you out in the desert of Las Cruces and howling like a coyote, has he? That's pretty severe. Until Nebuchadnezzar repented and said, Lord, all this stuff is because of you. So let's look and see what Daniel says next. He spilled the history lesson, verse 22. He says, but you, Belshazzar, his son, had not humbled yourself. Oh, shoot. Just read me the inscription, dude. First it's history lesson, now he's reprimanding him. You have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. So Daniel is telling us and Belshazzar, you knew all this happened to your grandfather. You forgot. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. We see all that in the first few verses, how he began to go out of his way to mock God. He says, you had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank from them. He spells it out. That's what you did. Here's what else you did. You praised the God of silver and gold and bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand. But you did not honor God, who holds his hand in your life in all your ways. I mean, we can relate to this. How many of us worship gold, worship things, but yet we forget to worship God? What did he say? God is the one. King Belshazzar, you forget God holds your very life in your hands, in his hands. And you'll see in a minute that life's going to end soon. He knew all these things happened to Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather. but yet he did not learn from his mistakes. He almost repeated the very same thing, didn't he? He became proud. He became arrogant and began to mock God. And he opposed God by seeking out these items. And in essence, what I thought when I read this, I see Nebuchadnezzar, the phrase is thumbing his nose at God. Just going to give you a little advice. Don't ever do that. Don't give God attitude and say, you can't do anything about this. We'll see here that he can. Do you not realize, here's what Daniel was saying to Belshazzar. Do you not realize that the true and living God holds your very life in his hands? Do you not understand that? We need to understand that. You realize that God is giving you the next breath as you're sitting right here. If you actually sit and pay attention as you breathe, it comes so normally, we don't even realize that. If you ever had asthma, you realize, man, you notice that breathing issue. But we forget about that. Let's go ahead and look at verses 24 to 28. He goes on to say, because of all this, therefore, he sent the hand that wrote this inscription. In other words, he's telling, okay, God, if you were guessing, the God of Israel is the one who wrote this inscription. This is the inscription that was written. They say this is actually, these words here are Chaldean language. It says, mean, tekel, parsin. Here's what these words mean. You know, can you think, he couldn't wait to get to the meaning, but when he gets the meaning, I think he's wishing, you could have just waited longer. The word mean, M-E-N-E. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Do you hear how that phrase? He's numbered your days as king, and he's brought it to an end. What is he saying? It's done. Your kingdom, your reign as a king is ended. That is like now. Tekel. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Basically what he's saying here is because you have rebelled against God, because you have challenged God, God will judge you just as he judged your grandfather. He gives the meaning. Of course, we already went through that. And we look at where he says, use the scales, the weight scales. He says, the king was weighed on God's scales. And King Belshazzar came up short. Use the scale to make sure the payments are right. Use that, they used to use that a lot to weigh what the amount, right. And what was given by Belshazzar was found unacceptable. In other words, here's what he's saying. Belshazzar's moral and spiritual character did not measure up to the standards of God's righteousness, so he's rejected. That applies to us today. We cannot live in such a way that we get on that scale and say, okay, what you did, all the good things that you did, is it enough? You're going to be found wanting. The only way to make that scale balance out is to accept the gift, to place Jesus Christ on that scale, and that's going to meet God's standards. Because we, in our own self, can never measure up to God's standards. No matter how hard you try, you can't measure up to God's standards. The only way you're going to enter into heaven to receive forgiveness is through the payment made through Jesus Christ. And that's the message we need to be giving. And let me flip it on the other side. As a believer, that should be encouraging because it's not about what you do. God doesn't like me today. Look what I did. We all can say that. I messed up again. He's not going to love you any more tomorrow than he does right now. He loves you with all that he is, completely. Remember, his love is called agape love, not expecting anything in return. The last few verses here, 29 to 31. Then Belshazzar command Daniel to be clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Now, all that Daniel knows, I don't think he was too thrilled about it because he just said, your kingdom is done. So I'm going to give you third position in a kingdom that God said is done. I just think of those, the rappers, the big gold thing around his neck. It's like, here you go. That very night, Belshazzar, listen to this, that very night, the king of the Babylonians was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. Isn't that amazing? God's judgment came quickly. As soon as Daniel had given the king the bad news, and we go back, we know the Persians, the Medes, the Persians came together. They're attacking the kingdom of Babylon, the city of Babylon. God gave them victory, just like God gave the Babylonians victory over Israel. You guys remember that? God is the one that says, I give Israel into your hands because they've turned their hearts from me. So in the same way, he did that. So the fall of Babylon happened in 539 BC. It's actually a picture of the future fall of Babylon, the devil's world system. We'll see that in Revelation 17 and 19. It's actually, in Daniel, is also a picture of the future. They're always talking about the future city of Babylon, but it's really talking about, in essence, the world system, Satan's world system that's going to take over this world. As Bible-believing Christians can already see the handwritings on the wall. Can you see the handwriting on the wall in our world today? God is coming to judge it soon. So if you guys can see that, shouldn't that encourage you to tell someone? Shouldn't it encourage you to say, God, please give me the boldness to tell someone? Give me the boldness. You know, I think it's really hard, I don't know about for you, to talk to my family, the closest ones, if you have a father or mother, because they know you, or even close friends, but tell them about Jesus Christ. But if you really love them, wouldn't you tell them? Just like Pastor Fred always tells that story. He says, if you were to see a blind man walking to the edge of a cliff, would you yell at them, hey, you're going to fall off, you keep walking that way, you're going to fall off the cliff? Would you say it like that, or would you say it with some urgency? Would you run and grab them and pull them? You wouldn't worry about offending them, would you? But why, as believers, are we so worried about, well, if I tell them it's going to offend them? Would you rather not offend them and let them go to hell? Or would you rather offend them and when they see you in heaven, they're going to say, thank you. I know I was pretty mad at you when you did that, but I am so grateful that you were willing to step out of your comfort zone and tell me the truth. With that said, we're going to end this chapter, and we'll go into prayer in just a second.